I said that we're going to have to break our outputs apart into individual pieces that we're going to save to files and that we're going to later reassemble. Now, this sounds much easier than it actually is, and because there's a really important point to this, which is that if you break it apart into individual pieces and you're working on one piece at a time, you can have Code Interpreter lose track of the big picture and understand how do the pieces fit together. And also when it's writing or working on an individual piece, it may not have the full context or information in order to appropriately write that piece. Now, when I say write, I'm using this term very liberally. It could be writing software. It could be writing and creating some visualization. It could be, going and writing a part of a book. It could be producing slides. Whatever it is, whatever big thing you're doing when it's trying to write or produce output, if it doesn't have the big picture, then it's going to be harder for it to do the right thing. You might get one piece that says one thing, another piece that says something very close, duplicates a lot of what came before, and only says a little bit new, or you may get something that's just completely disconnected and incoherent. And so if you don't have full context, if you don't have everything in one chat message, it gets harder for it to reason about how to write the individual pieces correctly and save them as individual files that when you put them together actually make sense. So how do we go about tackling this problem? Well, what we need to do is we need to think about outlining. Outlining is the mental model as soon as you start working with big files, big outputs. You want to think about outlines. Now, the outline may take many different forms. The outline can be the plan of how we're going to incrementally go and tackle the problem, and we can use the outline as something that can remind Code Interpreter of where it is in the process. So the outline may be a set of steps that are going to take place in a certain order and then are going to be applied to every file. It could be a variety of different things. And we went into a lot of detail on AI planning and sort of also contrasting that with human planning. And what you were really doing also is building an outline. You were building an outline of the process. So what we want to do, just like we did when we were doing planning and we were breaking down the task step by step, is we want to build a roadmap of step by step, what are all the individual pieces of content and how do they fit together? And that's what the outline gives us. So in this example, I'm going to take a transcript from one of my videos and I'm going to ask it to outline that transcript, and I'm going to ask it to outline for certain things. I'm asking it to look for skills or techniques or patterns that I talk about and really emphasize those in the outline, because that's the form that I want the overall structure to take. I want it to really be focused around patterns and skills. So when you're building that outline, make sure it emphasizes. You can say just outline it, and sometimes that works, but really we want to think about how do you want to structure everything. So it goes and it builds an outline for me. And notice we have 4 sections here. Now what I want to show you is I want to show you how one of the sections evolves. So in the beginning we had section 1 and it just had a paragraph of text, and this is now section 1 as I'm evolving this outline. I keep asking it to expand on different parts of the outline, and as I'm doing that, you'll notice now section 1 has a bunch of subsections underneath it, including this section 1.2.2, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to expand section 1.2.2, and now I have 1.2.2.1 and 1.2.2.2 and 1.2.2.3, and I keep expanding this until it gets bigger and bigger. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm incrementally expanding the roadmap or the overall structure that I can provide to Code Interpreter to help it assemble the pieces, but also to know what all the pieces are and to know where it is. Now, sometimes what's going to happen is Code Interpreter is going to forget where it is, or Code Interpreter may time out or something like this. So this outline that you're producing is a really, really valuable product that you want to save incrementally. And you'll see I'm doing that right here. I'm actually saving it to a file. So as I'm going and I'm building out the outline, I start saving the outline to a file. Because more than likely what's going to happen is at some point my outline itself may be bigger than what I can fit into a single message. And this is one of the parts where outlining is really effective, because once I get to the point where, let's say, all 4 sections can't fit into one chat message, which is really what's starting to happen here, I start breaking it apart and I just say, okay, go work with section 1. And I can provide it the high-level titles of section 1, 2, and 4, and 3, or whatever the important sections are related to it, and then I can give it the detail for one individual section. Or if even that gets too big, I can go and drill down to one particular level within the outline. And so the key is that you can zoom sort of up or down in the outline in order to control how much of the big picture is present in Code Interpreter at one time. Now, we're doing this because we can't fit it into one message. We can't fit it into one output. And we need Code Interpreter to understand how does everything fit together. If you can get it all to fit together, by all means do that. But if you can't, build an outline and start incrementally expanding it. And then when you put the pieces together, you want to give Code Interpreter and instruct it to put the pieces together as specified in the outline. So an outline is essentially a plan for how all of the different pieces fit together, but it's also a plan that is very effective because you can break the plan, you can break it apart at a certain level of granularity in order to provide Code Interpreter in a message the information it needs to accomplish a particular task. So if I'm writing section 1.2.2, or maybe let's say I'm writing these subsections down here, I may not need to provide it information in 1.2.1 or 1.2.2.1. I can just leave that out, and I may just provide it the information about 1.2.2. I may provide it the information, this high-level bullet here. I may provide this high-level bullet here, but I may eliminate and not show it these things here. And I may not show it any of the things that come after. It just really depends on how important it is for these to be integrated together. Now, this is another important piece to know. The more independent the individual pieces are, the easier it's going to be to do this. So if you can just have it go and write and do things completely independently from one another, and they don't need to have any context of the other pieces, this is when it's easy. Now, let's imagine that I'm writing section 1.2.2.2 here, dealing with unstructured text, and I need it to know about what was said in structure 1 or in section 1.2.2.1, which is what came before it. If I need it to know that, I'm going to have to provide that context back to it before I have it go and write those sections. So you always have to be thinking, and this is why an outline is also helpful, what comes before or after that it needs to be aware of, and can I pull that out of the outline and put it into the context of what's being written. Now, and it's when all the pieces have to like fit together and hang together, and this piece that comes before it has to have a little hook for the next piece of content, and that has to have a little hook. That's when things get more difficult, and that's when the outline becomes really important, because you can provide different chunks to help make sure it has the context to put things together. The context may also be go and load the last two paragraphs of text from 1.2.2.1.2 and provide them at the start of this section so that you can see the last two paragraphs you wrote, refresh its memory, and then it can start picking up from there, and it doesn't write something that is completely disconnected. So if you can get all the individual pieces to be completely independent from each other, and then you just assemble them according to the roadmap, that is ideal. If you can't do that, then you have to start thinking about which pieces of the outline need to be present at the point that I write another piece of content. So you can then use the outline to help you figure out, all right, here's the bullets that it needs to know before it writes this piece of content to make sure that it has the appropriate context. Or you may also have to go and think about what are the prior outputs, like paragraphs of text that I can need to provide it to fit in to make sure the writing is more closely tuned and aligned. And so you'll have to come up with strategies basically to use the outline to figure out what needs to go into the individual pieces, how to put them together, and how to make sure that they're all cohesive. And that's a really, really tough problem, but outlining is your friend. Outlining is going to be the backbone of what you do, and as you produce these outlines, make sure that you save them. Now I'm going to show you one other example of why saving an outline is so important. As you'll see here, I'm going through, and as I'm producing every single thing as I'm going along here, I'm saving it to a file. And that's because when you're working with Code Interpreter, it's going to time out sometimes. You're going to have to go and pick up your work where you left off. And at some point, you're going to want to do something that looks similar to this. Whereas it timed out, it lost some files, and now I'm just uploading different pieces of the outline, different intermediate products that it created, and I'm giving it back to it. And part of the beautiful thing about this is since I've got the outline, I can say, here's the overall structure, here's different pieces that you've created up to this point, and it can begin picking up where it left off. And the outline gives it the structure to help remember and pick up with what it did before. Or you can start a completely new conversation for some subsection of that outline, say, here's the overall structure. Now in this new conversation, just go and work on this piece over here, and you can go and increment on, iterate on it, produce some intermediate outputs, and then you can take those and in a later conversation, bring everything back together, give it one big zip file of all the sections, tell it what the naming scheme is, and how to match what the different files are back to the overall outline, and then ask it to put everything back together using the overall outline.